Hello, and welcome to the first installment of the MUD Parcel Reading Series for 2023. The series is a video companion to the MUD Proposal online journal that is currently on its 10th edition. MUD is annually updated and features poets and projects that are multidisciplinary in focus and international in scope. You could find the series at the web address themudproposal.kaurab.com, Kaurab.com. I'm Pat Clifford. I am a social worker and producer of the series, and my co-editor, Arjanil Mukherjee, is here as our host and discussant. We'll see him a little bit later. So we're joined today by José Kozer. Some may remember José from our reading and discussion last year, also with Peter Boyle, our other guest, where we remember the connection between poets George Oppen and Buddhadev Bose. And now José is here to read more from his own work, particularly from the long poem Anima. So we also heard from Peter Boyle reading some of his work from our series edition in August of 2022. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. So José is coming to us from Florida. As I won't do an extensive bio, you could go back to our episode last December for more of that. But briefly, born in Havana, Cuba, to parents who immigrated from Poland and Czechoslovakia, left Cuba in 1960, lived in New York till 97, when he retired from Queen's College as a full professor. Peter is joining us from Sydney, Australia, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Detailed bio is included in his episode in August. But apropos to this, Boyle, Peter, you've translated many French and Spanish poets, including Lorca, Cesar Vallejo, and of course, José Kozer. So we're going to do basically a bilingual reading. So José will read Spanish original first, and then Peter will read his English translation second, and then there'll be, I believe, 5 or 6 poems, and then we'll come back for a short discussion. So again, thank you both for joining us. I'll go off camera, and then if you could start reading, that would be great.
Okay. All the poems in this book are called Anima, most of them. These are 60 poems that I wrote in 60 days when I was 60 years of age. So there's some symmetry in that desire to express a certain time in my life where you're beginning to get old and all the complications and beauties of old age. The first poem is a longer one. It's entitled Anima, and it says in the original, mi hogar es este espacio que media entre la coronilla y los pies, es el hogar, la mano diestra de Guadalupe abierta ante mi atónita mirada, el brazo siniestro extendido a todo lo largo de su efímera corpulencia vegetativa, ganga, veta, el cardenillo cayendo de sus ojos, arcos de sus axilas resplandecientes de rubio, pez, la voz de Guadalupe al llamarme a la mesa, que otro hogar. Ni nación, ni votos, ni palcos, ni corros, ni pila bautismal o pila municipal, los pilares del mundo real son sus muslos. La basón del centro ígneo de los tiempos que corren, piedra caliza desmoronándose de sus cimientos a la visible cúpula que el viento orada a punto de caer, estrépito del silencio, el hogar cuesta abajo disolviéndose concéntrico de círculo en su descenso mecánico astral al fundamento del limo, hongos verdinegros, musgo enjaezado, un almirez de teca donde triturar todo aspaviento de conversación más allá de nuestras implícitas presencias visibles, presentidas, ¿a dónde? A veces de cuerpo entero en una pared recién encalada, a veces formas desfiguradas, en dirección contraria o entrecruzándose en los ejes de una sombra que proyecta la lámpara recién encendida, por cual mano que brazo, cuales tentáculos que uñas desgarraron la luz del techo. Zarpa, triturar unos dientes de ajo, mezclar la sal viva con la vivacidad del aceite de oliva, a punto de chisporrotear en una sartén de cobre de Santa Clara, envejecida, hogar, este cuerpo doble buscando el calor del abrazo en la sombra de una cerámica inamovible, proyectada en el suelo del comedor, ardor, el cardenillo al caer. Hormigas, comején, polillas, carcoma, el cocuyo visible toda la noche en el trigal, el cocuyo visible toda la noche en un campo enardecido de altas amapolas que ya alcanzaron la potestad de Jerusalén. Toda la noche, la polilla circunscribiendo el pezón izquierdo de Guadalupe, yacente a mi lado el cocuyo, jaraneando alrededor de su pezón derecho, vivos helechos mis dedos, retosando carcoma, cardenillo, morín, entre sus pelambreras. Y reímos a dos voces, simultáneas reímos, reencontrados en el eje circular del agua, que desciende de un círculo a otro por declives apenas perceptibles rumbo al hogar, único de esta copa en alto vaciada, uva vacía. La volcamos riendo de una patada, desternillándonos, se desprenden los ejes, duelas, flejes, vemos riendo irrumpir en un bosque torbellino la huella.
And, I'll read English now. Okay. Anima. My home is the space between the crown of my head and my feet. Home is Guadalupe's right hand open before my astonished gaze, her left arm fully extended in her ephemeral corpulence, vegetative, base metal, veined rock, green rust falling from her eyes, light blue, from her armpits, shining blonde. Fish, Guadalupe's voice calls me to the table. What other home is there? Neither nation, nor votes, nor box seats, nor choirs, nor baptismal font, or public trough. The pillars of the world are her thighs, lava from rushing time's fiery core, limestone rock eroding from the foundations to the visible dome, the wind pits withholds, on the verge of falling. A crash of silence, the home concentric, dissolving downhill from circle to circle in its mechanical astral descent to its base in slime, green-black fungi, moss harnessed. A mortar and pestle to grind every gesture of conversation that goes beyond our implied visible presences. Foreseen, where? Sometimes full length on a recently whitewashed wall, sometimes shapes contorted in opposite directions or crossing each other on the axes of a shadow cast by the light switched on just now on the ceiling. What hand, what arm, what tentacles, what fingernails have torn the light apart? A claw. To grind a few cloves of garlic, to mix fresh salt with the liveliness of olive oil, till it all sizzles in an old copper frying pan from Santa Clara. Hone this double body, looking for the heat of the embrace in the shadow. A motionless statue casts on the dining room floor. Glowing heat, green rust as it falls. Ants, termites, moths, woodworm, the firefly visible all night among the wheat, visible in a burning field of poppies, grown so tall they reach Jerusalem's power and might. The moth tracing circles all night round the left nipple of Guadalupe, lying by my side. The tipsy firefly circling Guadalupe's right breast, living ferns my fingers, brushing woodworm, verdigris, rust, playfully among her pubic hair, and we laugh. Our two simultaneous voices laugh, re-met, at the circular axis of water as it descends by barely perceptible falls from circle to circle towards the unique home of the glass, raised in cheers, emptied, barrel empty. We knock it over, laughing with a kick, splitting our sides. The axes give way. We watch laughing, staves, hoops burst in a forest groves, whirl of energy, the trace left. Yeah.
The next poem is on page 164, Peter. And it reads in Spanish. Anima, está todo en su sitio, el terebinto de mi bosque de letras, la vez que presté atención al viento haciendo bailar las pencas y las frondas, y lo denominé en mi cabeza viento negro del rey Ahab, cesó el viento, una llamarada blanca cesó. El cuarto, sea ciencia cierta que es una representación de la máxima blancura concebible asimismo de su vacío. Lo sé por su manifestación, res, su discurrir, conformar, materia y configuración, vedlo. Una lámpara de noche de donde brota la máxima claridad concebible de una hoja amarilla del sicomoro, la abeja travestida a madría del cocuyo que es el relámpago hecho trizas, la triza de lo verde, vuelta verdinegro, vuelta negrura, antes de reconfirmarse, cuarto amueblado por 4 o 5 objetos, todos en cuanto confirmación, revestidos a grosso modo de sus cualidades más distintivas. Ya puedo salir de espaldas de la habitación a un abismo, vaciar, puedo, mi renovación está todo en su sitio dispuesto. El alba o la negrura, la compasión de la reina madre por las aves, el ruido impecable de la carpa en la alberca, zambulléndose al hambre, los dos nenúfares simultáneos cerrándose. Un rubí, un agotamiento de mi energía descomunal, de repente inexplicable a la vez que esperado y deseado en última instancia. El verbo y un versículo del libro abierto al azar, como vasija de alfarero, harás los añicos. Y en verdad, yo voy de mi figura al añico.
Anima, everything is in its place. The terebinth of my forest of letters, the time I paid attention to the wind that set the ferns and palm leaves dancing, and in my head I named it King Ahab's black wind. The wind stopped. A blaze of white fire stopped. The room, I know with distinct and clear knowledge, represents the maximum conceivable whiteness at the same time as its absence. I know this from its manifestation, res, its passage through time, how it conforms to matter and shape. Look at it. A bedside lamp, when a maximum conceivable brightness of a yellow sycamore leaf bursts forth a bee, cross-dressed hamadryad, a firefly that is a shattered lightning flash, shattered fragment of green, become green-black, become blackness, before verifying for itself the room furnished with 4 to 5 objects, all by way of confirmation, dressed once more grosso modo in their most distinctive qualities. Now I can leave. I can back out of the room towards my abyss, can empty out my renewal, Everything is in its place disposed. Dawn or blackness, the Queen Mother's compassion for birds. In the pool, the perfect sound of the carp as it dives in its hunger. 2 water lilies simultaneously closing, a ruby. My extraordinary energy exhausted, suddenly and inexplicably, even though to be expected, and in the long run wished for, the word, and a verse from the book opened at random. Shatter them like a potter's vessel, and truly in my person I travel from shape to shard.
Thank you, Peter. The next one is on page 38, the Spanish. It's also called, of course, Anima, and it has a saying by Eudora Welty, the American novelist, that says, "Oh, to have been one step further on and grown flowers." The Spanish reads, un campo de achicoria recorre los sirocco, escóndete lagartija. Ya viene pastando, ya viene la vaca pastando. Campo agostado de achicoria, un ramillete en el florero de la sala. Bata de casa estampada, azul floración, un círculo negro a la muerte amarillera. Un círculo a su punto concéntrico, cornucopia de muertos. Y tú, eres tú, inclinada sobre un ramillete de flores secas en un florero, la bata de casa abierta de par en par, al golpe seco del siroco, escamando, que simulas una ofrenda, núbil el vello, ovarios circulatorios, trompas de luz, el íntimo, arcaduz de tu carne, vivo saco de agua lleno de flores. Apoyamos la frente en la ventana, un ajimez nos separa, la mirada nos une en la contemplación de la tiñosa cebándose en la víscera azul de la res.
Anima. A field of chicory races all over it. Sirocco, lizard, hide yourself. Now the cow comes grazing, now it comes to graze. Parched fields of chicory, a bunch in the living room vase. Patterned bathrobe, blue blooms, a black circle, death turning yellow. A concentric circle to its center, cornucopia of the dead. And you, is it you then, leaning over a bunch of dry flowers in a vase, your bathrobe wide open to the dry beating of the sirocco, scaling flake on flake. You, the picture of an offering, nubile down, circulating ovaries, tubes of light, intimate conduit of your flesh, living umbilical waters filled with flowers. We lean our foreheads against the window, a mullion separates us, our gaze joins us, contemplating a buzzard glutting itself on the beast's blue viscera.
How is ajimez in English, Peter?
Ajimez, I have mullion.
Yes. Yeah.
Not a word I actually recognize at the moment. I must have looked it up somewhere.
No, of course, me too.
Yeah. Ajimez, that's not a common word in Spanish either, I imagine.
But in architecture, yes, huh? It's
Yeah, in architecture.
Yeah. The last one I am going to read is called Anima, and it's on page 14. It reads, en la vieja ciudad, los canales de desagüe bordean los contenes. La vaca se inclina a lamer gozosa de moho, y mi madre, estrellada tras los blancos sanguiñuelos en flor, suma las lentejuelas de su vestido, se ríe delante de una coqueta. A punto de salir, la llaman, o será que la denominan. Bailó. Las lentejuelas de su vestido se deslizan fulgurando por los desagües de la ciudad, trizas las estrellas. Llama la vaca, a tu lengua es verde. Síguela, bordeando los contenes, mi madre desemboca en los antiguos canales de irrigación. Solo queda vida en las afueras de la ciudad. Revístela. El único recurso del agua que corre o se estanca será sentarnos yo mismo contigo, pasados los cuadros de labranza en la linde del bosque, besarte en la frente, madre estrellada, asistir a la formación de las aves en primavera, ver, marcar tu frente al rojo vivo. Baja 2 veces el testuz, recibe primero la corona en el pescuezo, puede ser eso, y luego el vestido largo de falla recién casada, a tus espaldas rehecha la trenza, roto saco de aguas.
Anima. In the old city, storm drains line the curbs. The cow leans over happily to lick mildew. And my starry mother, among the flowering white dogwood, counts the sequins on her dress, laughs before the vanity. About to leave, they call or name her. She dances. Sequins tumble from her dress, glittering on the city storm water, shards, stars. Call her, cow. Your tongue is green. Follow the cow along the curbs. My mother comes out at the old irrigation canals. In the city, life's only on the outskirts. Swathe her in layers of clothing. The one recourse offered by this water that flows or is stagnant will be for us to sit down, myself with you, beyond the ploughed fields, at the edge of the wood, to kiss you on the forehead, mother, starry one, to witness the creation of birds in spring, to see, to brand your forehead twice. She bows her forehead, receives first the crown around her neck, cherry flowers, and then the long veiled dress, just married, behind you the braid redone, broken amniotic waters.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for that wonderful reading and for taking the time. I was enjoyed reading along with the verse. I know Jose, you were referring to the page numbers, and we forgot to mention this Shearsman edition of these poems is something that you all should have in your library, and if you can get it to read along yourselves. Really appreciate it. I think it was 2011 or something like that. It was great.
I asked you got that book through Amazon or through?
Might be small press distribution. I'm not sure.
I got it from Amazon. I got mine from Amazon.
From Amazon. Oh.
Awesome. Well, I know Arjanil had some questions to kick us off, but I don't know if either of Jose or Peter, did you have any comments after that the reading kind of brought up, or should we?
Yeah, well, I don't have really a whole lot, but I would seek just a few clarifications. But I would also agree with Pat, that Peter and Jose, is there something that you want to talk about with each other? I think we would enjoy that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
About the translation, maybe, of or how the translation process ensued.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, and Peter is the translator, so we should listen to him more than to me. There are 2 issues that are very important. With Peter, it was a very long process until we came to today's way of working together. He has become such a fine translator of my work, which is not, as we say in Spanish, moco de pavo, very easy to deal with, and extremely complex poetry with lots of referential material. But he's such a cultured person that he doesn't need me at that level. And also there is, God bless it, Google, where both of us can go and find information. And information is not always reliable, but it's a way of. Then there's an issue of Cubanisms, which are extremely complex. And as I grow older and keep on working, which is miraculous, I'm almost 84 years of age. I have now 15,400 poems, you know, which is a strange feeling. I mean, in terms of quantity and numbers. And I hope what I'm going to say doesn't sound pure vanity, but I don't write bad poems. So that, no, I don't. So that, you know, each of those 15 plus poems is not crap. You may like them, you may dislike them, but they're meant and are, I think they stand on their own. However, dealing with the issue of Cubanism, it's become more and more complex and more difficult because, you know, when you get older, you begin to remember a lot of things, a lot of issues, a lot of, you know, I just wrote a poem the other day, very short, beginning with sad Cubanisms of the 1940s and the 1950s. And my wife, who is first of all Spanish from Spain, and second of all, much younger than myself, I read it to her. And at one point she says, "Oh, how nice that you talk so well about women." And I said, no, you're mistaking the meaning of this verb in here. This means the opposite. I'm denigrating women. He says, how come? I said, look, that word means in Spanish to screw. And it's called beneficiar, to benefit a woman, which is, I mean, the most misogynist and machista thing you can think of. And she said, oh, I catch it. Or for instance, we used to use, no longer used, and I still use it. Like I want to say to you, I send you my best to you and your family. I say, te envío mis expresiones. And she said, what does that mean? And I said, you know, I'm sending you my best desire for you. And she had tears in her eyes. She said, that is so touching. And she's been talking about that all day, very touched by the expression, which to myself, it still is kind of like a regular thing to which I don't pay much attention. So this difficulty, Peter and I, we have to deal with constantly. And the second one is, at first I had to work a lot with him because, you know, his Spanish was, especially with verbs and things like that, we had to be very attentive and very concentrated in terms of getting the right translation. But eventually, he started on his own. I mean, he's taken poems of mine that are rather complex, and 20 minutes after, I get from him a note from Australia saying, here it is. And I start reading it without looking at the original, and I know it's perfect. So the freedom that I feel with him, I would like to see how he feels about all this, is tremendous. So I'm very fortunate to have him as a great poet, which he is, as a good friend, which he is, and a very unique translator. You know, it's such a joy to be able to say to anyone, my translator, you know, as if that in itself meant something very, very grand. So today, and I will deal with this with Peter on an email, in one of the poems I caught a mistake. And it doesn't interfere with the poem, which is the funny thing. It does not at all. If you don't know Spanish, well, even if you know Spanish, the word pez means both a fish, which is how he translated it, and it's fine. But it's not meant that way. It's meant as chapapote. I'm sorry? What? R, exactly. That's what it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, don't change anything at this point. The book has become very attractive to so many people. For some reason, it's one of those few books that if poetry sold, I'd have some money in my pocket. But, you know, poetry doesn't sell. So I'm sorry, I took too much time.
No. That also is quite, you know, I would say a bit mysterious because, you know, this is a book of very complex poems. I mean, this is the only book of yours I have read, Jose. Other poems, I've read it from here and there for anthologies mostly. But this is the first book of yours exclusively that I have read. And indeed, there is a lot of, I mean, one thing that struck me, I was talking to Pat about this, and the credit goes to, of course, you and Peter, that the vocabulary is really mind blazing, I would say. It's so wide and vast. I mean, I have some understanding of Spanish. I mean, I can just manage. I managed in Spain. Bring me a glass of water. Yeah, I can say that. But going through the translation, Peter, I mean, there were words that I've come across for the first time in my life. For example, reading this particular, which poem was that? Let me check. I noted down a few words, like the, the Hamadrid. I had never come across this word.
Hamadria is nothing but a mythological.
The spirit of a tree.
Yeah, that lives in the trunks of trees.
Okay.
It's a sheep.
It's a tree spirit. Hamadryad.
Right.
Hamadryad. Okay. And
I think
there was another word which. Yeah, I'll find that. But Peter, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about how you did the translation?
Well, this first book, Anima, which was the first book of José's I translated, was a very slow process. I mean, I think I was discovering José's. I mean, it's strange. I met José in Caracas in about 2005, I think.
Yeah.
I read just one or two of his poems from the book about Kafka, which José gave me in Caracas. Not many, just a couple.
Yeah, that's
they were very hard to, the Spanish was very hard to read. Stretched my Spanish, which gradually got better. I mean, the vocabulary was one difficulty. The other is that often it's hard to know what's the subject of a verb.
Right. Right.
Yeah, because it's hard to track what's happening because there's not a lot of vocabulary. Sorry, not a lot of punctuation.
Yeah.
And that can make it a bit difficult. And also Spanish can sometimes put the noun, the subject after the verb. It can move the positioning around a lot more than we would do in English.
That's very Baroque. I mean, that was normal in the golden century. Everyone used that strategy. Yeah, the Góngora used it endlessly. So,
so there's a lot of potential for misunderstanding or not getting it,
right.
And not getting the references. And then there's the fact with multiple words, with so many words in Spanish have multiple meanings. You look up a dictionary, and the word, the Spanish dictionaries give you the meaning in all these different countries.
Right, right.
So, like the same word will mean a homosexual in one country and my best friend in another. It's just completely contradictory.
Concha is a typical name in Cuba. It's Concepcion. I mean, and in Chile it means C-U-N-T. So, I mean, like that example, you have hundreds and hundreds. And but, in my case, number one, the syntactical situation has to do with the fact that I was raised both in Yiddish and in Spanish. And English became sort of like another language in my life very early. So that the Yiddish, which is close to German, makes, the verb situation very, it's kept aside until at the end and you have to reconstruct the entire thing. I've noticed lately, I had a long stage where I used definite and indefinite articles constantly. My head functioned. That nowadays has been maybe more than 2,000 poems. I don't use them. I simply skip them. That's my Chinese influence, and I'm not joking. The way Chinese functions, and my Chinese, of course, is non-existent, but through English translations, some of them just wonderful, I've gotten accustomed to, or with Japanese, there's no article, there's no feminine, masculine, which is such a liberating thing, and all that, plus the fact that I've been invited for years and years and years to so many different countries, so that I've spent a month in Costa Rica, a week where you were in Venezuela. The history of my book in Venezuela is very complex. And I said, the people that told me to publish with them, I said, no, they're not going to publish it. I'm Cuban and outside of Cuba. I've been all my life against the so-called revolution, which we call, instead of revolución, rovolución. Robar is to steal, you know? So, you know, and I've expressed politically how I feel. And they said they will accept your book because of your reputation. And not meant, you know, in terms of reputation, they meant that I'm an honest man. And I don't sell myself cheaply. So indeed, the book was published, and it was a surprise. And the guy who publishes it said at one point publicly, he said, we publish Kozer because we believe in his poetry and we think he's an important poet. And he says, I am he, not me. I am a member of the Communist Party. And I am a Chavista 100%, but I'm also an editor. And I have to respect, beyond politics, the poetry, which is what I'm interested in. And you know, that calls for a better world. What can I say? It's a wonderful feeling.
Really, that's so interesting. And what another question for you, Jose, and also Peter. So how much do you think the language changes from Cuba to Mexico? Spanish.
It's a tremendous one.
Tremendously, okay.
You know, in Chile, about 15 years ago, Germany gave a lot of money to a small group of scholars to produce complete dictionaries of Spanish by country. So this project was a project that I know of it because a friend of mine was the head of the project. And she told me that they did the complete dictionary of Argentina, Cuba, Uruguay, there was another, and when they came to Mexico, they gave up. The Germans said, we don't have enough money to produce the amount of, because Mexicans have two parallel languages. The indigenous one, which is alive as we're talking now, you know, and the Spanish one. So that if you live in Mexico, you get accustomed to words that are purely Quechua or come from, you know, the Aboriginal, so-called Aboriginal languages, and the regular Spanish, which again is changed around and fooled around with tremendously. They have something called albures, which is they're making fun of you when you, and you don't realize they're making fun of you when you talk because they're using certain words in a certain way that only a Mexican can get what's behind it. For instance, there's a town called Tasco near, it's not too far from Mexico City. And I would say, Tasco, I'm going to Tasco. And I meant I'm going to travel to Tasco. To them, it meant also I'm going to be from my behind. So that, you know, how can you deal with this when you're not
Right. I've heard about the, a very similar kind of situation where, like in Spain, one would say, like, coger el autobús, but you can't say that in Mexico.
Exactly. In Chile or in Argentina, coger el autobús means to make love to a child. Guagua.
Okay. Wow.
We say coger la guagua. And guagua in Chile and Argentina is a little baby. So, I mean, it calls for tremendous misunderstanding.
Okay, a few clarifications I'll have to. Sorry.
I was saying the perils of translation. It sounds like.
Yeah, the perils of translation, really. The poem on page 164, beginning with Está todo en su sitio, On that one, so once again, Peter, the terebinth, I'd never come across this word before.
It's in the Bible.
Terebinth, okay.
It's in the Bible.
Terebinth, yeah. Yeah, I must have looked it up. It's a biblical word for a particular kind of tree.
Kind of tree, Mediterranean, okay. Yeah. And also a question about, the word, two words in parenthesis, res.
Is
I presume
is that
I
Latin?
presume-
Is that a little
I
Latin?
presume that was the Latin res, although of course this is one of the
Oh, yes,
tricky
yes.
things.
Oh, I see now. Yeah.
If it was cattle, it could mean cattle. If it was Spanish,
Of course. But the
if it
funny
was
thing-
Latin, it would mean thing, or a thing. Yeah.
the funny thing with the word res is that it originates in the French, the word rien. So res is cosa, whereas rien is the opposite, nothing. And yet rien comes from res. So the repetition of res is because of one form of information, and then in the other parenthesis, another form of information. But this is you can say it's all complex and very referential. I would agree with that. However, also, what I'm dealing with is the complexity of language, of any language. The way we talk is the way we are. And it's our nature to speak in a certain way. So many issues.
Yeah, it does happen. It reminds me, I had this habit of referring to a cousin always as a cousin brother or a cousin sister. I would say my cousin sister and I went to the circus. And once, I forget who, but an American poet, she asked me that why do you say like that? I mean, is there a reason, the cousin sister or cousin brother? Why do you have to specify? Well, it happens naturally because in Bengali, pronouns are not gender indicative. So if I might say 10 sentences about a particular cousin, and because the pronouns and the verbs are not gender indicative, you might never find out whether I'm talking about a brother or a sister.
In Spanish, death is feminine. In the Anglo-Saxon world, is masculine. So that, and very non-specific, because you simply say death. You don't say death, he, death. But in Spanish, we always say muerte or la muerte. I was writing a poem today, a very kind of painful poem because of old age and the closeness of death. And at one point, I used the word tarugo, which is a piece of wood you put under a door so that it doesn't close. But it also is used in many countries, Cuba among them, as your servant, but in a very negative way. If I say, tú eres mi tarugo, you are my tarugo, I'm saying, you're dependent on me, you're nothing, you do as I tell you, almost as if I said.
Exactly like doormat. That's exactly the way we use the word doormat.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a doormat.
Yeah, exactly. In that sense. You see, he's a translator. And I had it as taruga in the feminine, which sounds awful to me. So eventually I managed to do a construction that I could use tarugo as la muerte. And it worked to my satisfaction. So, these are the complexities of cultures and the way language is used. And it's hard to explain to an Anglo-Saxon. They always say, why is death feminine? And it's in the nature of the formology of the language. That's all. It's a grammatical issue. It's not a philosophical issue. But she's always depicted as a woman, with like the caderas, the sides are very open. Her pelvis is very wide. She sits on a horse, like men sit, because when she sits differently, it's called a la mujeriega, the way women sit on a horse. So, every issue has information, has process. To this day, and this is very strange, so many years. I remember a word in Spanish, which I learned in the States. I didn't use it in Cuba. And suddenly it comes to my head. And I remember the person I learned it from. The first time someone used it and said, ah. And it's been 40 years, but I always associate. 2 days ago, I'm talking to my wife and I said something. And I looked at her and said, you know who I learned this word from? She said, no, from your older sister. We were in Spain, we were talking, she used that word. Every time I use it, I associate it with her. So, I mean, we're all more or less in a form of exile for many reasons. And we're in very different languages. For me, when this...
That's a very beautiful thought, to feel like you are always, when you are operating between and across languages, and the fact that you feel always in a state of exile. I mean, that's such a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
One other question, I think that would be my last question, about the use of the word and what it really means. I would like to ask, grosso modo.
What?
Grosso modo.
Grosso modo, in a general sense, it's Latin.
Okay.
Well, of course, grosso is fatness, so that there's meat in there.
Is it a musical term?
I'm sorry?
I had a feeling the word's also used in music and musicology.
I think it's in Beethoven's. Yes.
Yeah.
But this is an expression that has nothing to do with music. De grosso modo, usually in a general sense, that's what you're saying. But in Latin, that sounds very chic.
Right. The tricks that lawyers and the doctors use.
That's right.
All right. Well, I think we're unfortunately running out of time, but it was a great reading and a great discussion afterwards. We really appreciate your time and wanted to thank you for making the time to join us for this reading. And as we wrap up, I also want to thank our listeners and viewers for this, and stay tuned soon for our next installment of the MUD Parcel Reading Series. Thanks.
Okay, very much.